video is sponsored by staring silently into the camera. It's when I do my best thinking. Hello my lovely friends, it's Margaret, and today we are going to be going over the second half of my July wrap-up. So, if you didn't know, July was a wild reading month for me because I read a crap ton of books. This wrap-up is going to be so long, I've taken notes. Hopefully it will be shorter than it would have been if I had not taken notes. There will be less rambling. Hopefully. So since I read so many books in July, I decided to split it into two parts. If you haven't watched that first part, I'll have a link up here and in the description box so you can go and check that out and see what I read. For those of you that missed having stats in part 1, don't worry, there will be stats in this video. I ended up reading 20 books in the month of July. That came to 2,400 or so pages. I really just kind of stopped keeping track. I stopped keeping track at some point. For the age range, I read 3 middle grade books, 13 YA, and 4 adult books. The format breakdown was 8 graphic novels, 8 physical books, and 8 audiobooks. The genre breakdown for what I read in July was 6 fantasy, 2 urban fantasy, 1 historical, 5 comics, 1 sci-fi, 1 contemporary, 1 classic, and 3 thrillers. And the rating breakdown came down to 5 5-star books, 9 4-star books, and 6 3-star books. With that out of the way, let's start talking about the graphic novels. Now, the first graphic novel we're going to be talking about in this wrap-up is Aquaman Rebirth Volume 2, Black Manta Rising. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This follows from Volume 1, where Arthur is trying to kind of smooth things over between Atlantis and the US, and he's trying to deal with the fact that someone out there is trying to frame Atlantis and make it look like they are attacking the land when they are not. That's very much what Arthur is not about doing. He's trying to foster a better relationship between the sea world and the land world. I don't know. I really enjoyed the storyline. I think I liked it a lot better than the first volume. It was a little bit easier to follow. I like that Mira kind of has a, not necessarily a proving herself arc, but she's having to really consider what it's going to mean to be Queen of Atlantis, because at this point, like, they are engaged, they are going to be married. The only thing that really bugged me about this was that everything went to the extreme so quickly. Like, the Justice League wasn't trusting Arthur, and I'm sitting there going, you've been working with this guy for how many years, and you're not trusting him, and then the US is like, no one was listening to Arthur. It just felt really frustrating to have nobody really listening to Arthur when he's saying, like, hey, hold on, this isn't us, and everybody's like, oh no, we're gonna go to war, we're going to attack you, and I just frustrated me. The way that the plot eventually culminated, I did find very satisfying, and I can't wait to, you know, pick up the next volume. The next 2 graphic novels that I read were Ouran High School Host Club Volume 7 and Volume 8 by Bisco Hattori. Both of these got 4 stars. I really enjoyed them. This focused more on the side characters. We get a little bit of Kyoya and Honey's kind of backstory family dynamic that's going on. I really enjoyed it. It just didn't quite have enough Tamaki in it for me. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's in there. I just would have liked a little bit more like Haruhi and Tamaki and less Haruhi and everyone else, but that's the way I always am. After that, I finished Orange, the Complete Collection Volume 2 by Ichigo Takano. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Technically, I only finished like the first 2/3 because the last third is a completely different manga, and that slightly irked me. This is about Naho, and in the first volume, she got a letter from herself 10 years in the future telling her to kind of watch out for this new student that was going to be at their high school that day. In that first volume, she finds out that that new student committed suicide, and so her future self is kind of trying to coach her through changing things up and maybe finding a way to get help for this student. I really like the friendship dynamic in this. It's a group of 6 friends. One of them is this new student that has come in, and all of them really just rally around what is going on. They are all there for each other. They have their little, like, struggles, and they argue with each other, but at the same time they always make up, and it shows some really great healthy friendship dynamics. I really enjoyed that. The thing that knocked off 2 stars for me though is that so much pressure was put on Naho and her friends to keep this student from committing suicide, and that just didn't jive well with me. There was not enough emphasis on professional help. I talk about it a lot more in my reading vlog, which I'll link up top. I just felt like it sent the message that it is your job to keep your friends from committing suicide. And yes, while you can have a huge impact on what decisions a person makes in a given day, you can be like, something that you say can be the difference between them committing suicide and not. At the same time, we still put way too much pressure on kids and teens and friends to fix that person when it's got to be that person wanting to fix themselves. There was a lot of emphasis on reaching out for help. I just wish that there had been a little bit more emphasis on the fact that, like, you are not responsible for your friends. It is not your fault if something like this happens. If you're looking for a nice, like, hard-hitting shoujo that's going to give you a really, like, a couple of sweet romances and some really great friendship dynamics, definitely pick this up. The next two that we're going to talk about are Death Note Volume 1 and Volume 2. I gave both of these 3 stars. They are about a boy named Light Yagami, and he finds what is called a Death Note. Now, a Death Note is something that is carried by a god of death or a Shinigami, and in it, they can write down the names of humans, and the humans whose names are written in that book will die. However, one of these Shinigami has dropped his Death Note in the human world, and now that it is in the human world, he cannot take it back. It belongs to Light, and Light has decided that he is going to go on this crusade to rid the world of all evil. I'm still a little bit on the fence on whether or not I will continue on with this series past like the next couple of I'm giving it a couple of more volumes, and then we'll see. But one of the things I really did like about this series is that the writer is so good at creating tension. There are so many things in the situation that can go wrong, and they don't do it in a way that is really cliched or tropey. Every time you kind of think you know where the story is going, they will put in this fantastic twist, and you'll be like, oh, okay, so this changes things. There are just several places where Light has to kind of adjust his thinking and what he's going to do because of the people that he comes up against. And I really did appreciate this. I'm not the biggest fan of the characters yet. We really haven't found any characters in here that I truly connect with and truly like. It does irk me just a little bit that we don't have a lot of female characters. I think we have 3. One of them is his mother, who we haven't seen much of. One of them is his sister, who we also haven't seen much of. And then the other female character that we have just seen ends up dying. And I'm just like, seriously? These are all dudes. Why are they all dudes? Probably because it's written by a dude, most likely. I haven't actually looked it up, but I would take a very hard guess that it was written by a dude. Still a manga that I am interested in reading and looking into, and I want to see what happens next because I have questions, I have thoughts. I would like to see where they go, but we will see how long I actually stick with this series. And the final graphic novel that I read in the month of July was Black Panther, A Nation Under Our Feet by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It was so good, you guys. I loved it. It was a little bit confusing at the beginning because you're kind of jumping in when a whole bunch of stuff has just gone down, so you're getting a little bit of the aftermath that's going on in this series. It took me a little bit, but I was able to piece together what was going on. There wasn't anything that was a huge hanging chad, like huge questions. This frustrated me just a little bit at first because it was one of the main villains, or one of the kind of antagonistic forces that are in this novel. They're all women. It's this group of all women, and they're very feminist, and they're very much about looking out for other women, and it irked me that that was an antagonistic force in this novel. However, I really like how it ends up resolving. I also really like the questions that T'Challa ends up asking in this about how is he supposed to be a king of Wakanda? How does he listen to his people but also lead his people? There just is a lot of exploration of him kind of having to go, okay, so this is what my father believed a king was and what I was raised to believe a king was, but is that the kind of king that I am going to be? Is that how I'm going to govern my people? Anything that I had a slight issue with at the beginning, it was there for a reason. It was a plot point, and so it ends up getting resolved and turned over, and it ends up being a lesson that is learned. So I really, really, really enjoyed this. Like, I love T'Challa. I loved having Shuri in here and their sibling dynamic, while a little bit more mature since they're older in the comics. It's great. I loved watching them. Also, we got a little bit of a cameo from Tony Stark, and it made me really mad that we don't get to see Tony and T'Challa going back and forth at each other in the MCU, because it would have been amazing. They were so funny. The only real thing that truly irked me that I haven't been able to get rid of, there were places that you could definitely tell that this was illustrated. The artists were male. You could tell just because how they costumed and drew some of the women. Not all of them. They actually did for the most part, they did a pretty good job. I had no problem with the fact that they were showing a lot of skin. That's the culture. That's how they live. But there were just places where I was like, this is obviously a little bit fan service. Just the way that the skin was shown and revealed, it felt like fan service, and it did irk me just a little bit. Those are all the graphic novels. I read a lot. I know. That was the plan. Now it is time to get into the audiobooks that I read in the second half of July. And the first audiobook that I finished in the second half of July was The Near Witch by Victoria Schwab. I gave this 4 stars. This wasn't on any of my TBRs that I was supposed to be reading for the month, but it happened to come in at my library right at a time that I needed some audiobooks to listen to, because I couldn't start my next audiobook until the 22nd because of the reading rush, but I'd also finished my other audiobook, and I was like, I need something to listen to. So this is what we picked up. For those of you that might not be familiar with Victoria or V.E. Schwab, this was her first novel that ended up going out of print, and then she became so popular that they brought it back into print. Like, listen, that is the dream, guys. Actually, the dream is having it completely sell out and never go off shelves, but you know. So this was a fantasy set in, like, felt like an English type countryside setting. It's never really stated where they are, but it is about a village where this stranger shows up, this mysterious stranger shows up, and then the very next day, children kind of start going missing. Actually, not kind of. They do start going missing. And so the main character, she is having to figure out, was it this stranger? Where are these children going to? It's got really interesting like retellings of the Pied Piper story vibes. It's not quite like a blow for blow retelling of the Pied Piper, but it does have a lot of elements of that story with a little bit of a twist. This delivered all of the stuff that I am used to having in a Victoria Schwab novel. It had great world building. It had such interesting characters. It had people who made me really mad because they were misogynistic. The plot was really well paced, and it was really interesting because it's just this structure of very simple solutions being held back because people are complicated. What needed to happen in order for them to save the day was not that complicated. It was rather easy to do, and yet people kept getting in the way and keeping them from doing what they needed to do. And I absolutely loved it. It was so good. Like, it was just, it really went to show that you could have a very simple plot and still have a very complex story. The only thing that I really was not a fan of was that the romantic element was not as strong as I would like. But also, that usually is how it goes in Victoria Schwab novels. She writes a story and there might be a romance in it, and it was cute and sweet, and I liked it. The next audiobook that I finished was A Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. So I finally got to this after having owned the second book for like almost 10 years. Do I own the first book? No! But I'm going to. I am going to. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is about Karou, and she is a girl who lives in 2 different worlds. She lives in our human world, but she also has family in this elsewhere, and these families, they're not quite human. They're actually very much like the opposite of human. So she ends up being confronted with the fact that her home, where she grew up, the people that she loves, suddenly disappear. She can no longer get through those doors. Everything goes up in smoke and flames, and she's having to figure out where did they go. And on top of that, she's kind of starting to realize that there are some things that she doesn't know about even her own past. I really, really liked this, okay? It was so good. It was so good that if I had not needed to finish another book to complete the reading rush, I would have gone straight into book 2. Like, I'm listening to book 2 right now, and it's very frustrating. There are characters that need to die. There really are. There are characters that need to die because they are awful, and they're manipulative, and I hate them. But that's not what we're here to talk about. This really reminds me of kind of the setup for Sailor Moon. The way that you know how if you've read Sailor Moon and you know kind of the way the plot works, how we kind of have the present and we have a little bit of the past that we're trying to figure out what's going on there. That's what this reminds me of. I really, really enjoyed it. This is one of those where the world building comes slowly because we start out in the human world, but she gives you just enough to be like, oh, this isn't normal. How not normal is it? What's going on here? You have so many questions, and it's just so satisfying to slowly get the answers. And one of the best parts is you are getting these answers at the same time as Karou is. You're kind of experiencing this re-emergence into her old life with her. Laini Taylor always has great world building and great characters and a plot that they are slower paced plots. Listen, there was an entire section here that we go into the past. It was an extended flashback. So if you don't like extended flashbacks, whatever. But it was still so interesting that I could not put it down, and I was very glad that I had a long drive to listen to it. But of course, then it ended in me screaming in the car because of how it ended, but you know, it's okay, it's fine. I have the next book, we're good, everything's fine. The next audiobook that I listened to was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I gave this 5 stars. It is my second favorite Jane Austen novel. I just love Eleanor and Marianne and how they have 2 very different approaches to living in Regency England and 2 very different approaches to romance and people and just life in general. And I love how they kind of learn from each other. They are sisters set in like 1810s Regency England. They've just lost their father and been kicked out of their home basically. Well, they chose to leave their home because their sister-in-law is awful and the worst. And their brother is also the worst. And so they end up having to kind of go off on their own and navigate 2 very different, very complicated love stories. And I love it. It has all of the wit and humor and fun that Jane Austen has. It has all of like that commentary. It's just so good and so ahead of its time. And I love Jane Austen. I do. I really, really do. She is superior. You really let me tell you, if you've tried reading Jane Austen and it hasn't worked for you, you really need to get like a good audiobook narrator, because a good audiobook narrator really brings the dry humor of Regency England to life, and it's amazing. Now it is time to finish the physical books. Basically, that is anything that I have to physically basically read with my eyes that does not include mostly pictures. So the first physical book that we're going to talk about is The Roses of May by Dot Hutchison. I love this series. I gave it 5 stars. This is a reread, by the way. This is a thriller, and it's a dual point of view novel. It follows on one hand one of the members of the FBI team that we met in the first book, the Butterfly Garden, and then it follows the sister of a girl who was murdered by a serial killer. Her sister was murdered several years ago, and so she and the FBI team have become very close as they're trying to figure out who killed her sister and the other girls that have been murdered. And then it starts to look like Priya, the main character, might be the serial killer's intended next victim. Listen, I am so proud of this woman. She is such a good writer. She always has such great characters. I just love the way she writes, okay? I just do. Definitely heavy trigger warnings for like sexual assault and sexual abuse and blood, gore, all of that, because it is a very gory, gruesome, gritty novel. Not as gory, gruesome, and gritty as some of the other ones, but it's up there. But I really like, she just writes such interesting, intricate stories, and you don't even, like, I figured out who the killer was, like, really early. I did have the advantage of knowing the author and knowing how she thinks. She has great characters. She creates stories where you are invested, maybe not in the victims themselves, but in the story that they're telling. I mean, I was invested in Priya's story and in her herself, and hoping that she did not end up murdered along with her sister. She is the queen of pop culture references. There were a couple of places where she mentioned stuff that just, like, stabbed at my 90s child heart. Like, there's one place where she mentioned Smurf murder. I was like, why are you murdering Smurfs, Dot? Stop it! I have no bad things to say about this book except for the fact that apparently Smurfs are murdered in the north. I didn't know this. Another reason for me not to move up north. Also, Dashani Pravasti, who is Priya's mom, is quite possibly the best character in written literature. The next physical book that I read was House of Hades by Rick Riordan. This was also a reread, and it also got 5 stars because this is my favorite series ever. I was actually thinking about the fact that, in all honesty, this should be my favorite of the Rick Riordan books, because it is the one that has the most of Percy and Annabeth having to deal with crap together as a team. I don't understand why the Mark of Athena is my favorite. I mean, maybe because it just has more emotional payoff moments, but this is just basically one giant Perkabeth adventure, and I love it. Look, my children are on the front cover. It's amazing. Despite the fact that it is only my second favorite book in the series, it is quite possibly the best book in the series. I'm always impressed with his writing, but he just reaches another level in this book. He is having to tell a story that goes back and forth between Percy and Annabeth and the rest of the 7, and we get points of view from all 7 characters, and yet it never feels like one point of view is unnecessary. It never feels like we are suddenly, like, it is always the exact character that needs to be in that exact situation. The way he does it is mind-boggling, and he is so clever and smart, and I wish my brain worked the way his brain works. Do as a writer. I'm just now realizing that all of these physical books are rereads. Like, the last 4 books have been rereads. So the final physical book that I read in the month of July was Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This was also a reread. I gave it 4 stars, which is a bump up from the last time I read it when I gave it 3 stars. I know this is going to piss some people off, but I'm still a bigger fan of the movie, just because I prefer the ending of the movie, and I prefer, like, I really, really enjoyed this. This is about Tristan Thorne, and he lives in the village of Wall, and he's in love with this woman named Victoria. Unfortunately, Victoria has her sights set on someone else. And then, one day, a star falls from the heavens and lands on the other side of the wall in Wall. And on the other side of the wall in Wall is a fairy. So Tristan convinces Victoria to agree to marry him if he can go and retrieve this fallen star and bring it back to her. I really, really enjoyed his writing style. I enjoyed how he structured certain things. I love how Neil Gaiman writes. I don't always necessarily enjoy the things he writes, but I love how he writes. This is written in 1999. This is a very, like, 1990s style fantasy YA. It has the fantastic chapter titles. It has that couple that are bickering for the entire book. Like, and I really, really enjoyed it because it had some really good quality banter. Where the movie really just kind of is better, in my opinion, is I like the ending of the movie a little bit better. It's not too much different from the book, but there are just a couple of details that are changed. I also like the fact that it's a more, like, the relationship is a little bit healthier in the movie. You have this couple that starts out hating each other, and then they kind of grow to respect each other, where I feel like it's very like, oh, I can't stand you, and then suddenly, oh no, it's fine. in this book. Like it's a very like hairpin turn. Like it feels like a complete 180 their feelings towards each other in the book. But I did feel like I appreciated it a little bit more this time. Maybe because I'm a little bit more cynical this time around. I don't know. So this is usually where I would compare what I was supposed to read this month to what I did read last month. But I read almost everything on my freaking TBR and then some. So I don't even feel like I need to guilt myself about like the 3 books that I did not get to, because we're gonna get to them in August. That is everything that I read in July. We're gonna limit ourselves to 2 readathons a month from now on, she says, despite the fact that she also said that in March and apparently didn't learn her lesson. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, hit that subscribe button. I make videos 2 to 3 times a week about books and writing, and I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. If you want more of me, all of my social media is down in the description box. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye! I don't know what this is sponsored by, so we're just gonna come up with it on the spot. So help me, Hedwig. If you fall down again, we're gonna have words. Everything's fine. Everything is fine. Everything's fine. We're good. Just kill them. Why are you being difficult? You weren't being difficult earlier. All right, so what are we doing with our lives? Oh, I have to clean up all of these books.